Hello, history students. We are going to look at the Gilded Age. So in your packet, find the page that has the sectionalized map in the middle, and it says the Gilded Age on the side. And I'm going to have you set up your paper. Now, because I am extra the way I am, I'm actually going to use 3 colors. I think at one time I even used 4 colors. You do you, okay? So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to take our map and we're going to turn it this way. And in the top corner, going this direction, you're going to write Industrial North. Now, don't write it crazy big because you're going to need some space. Okay, so Industrial North up here. Then we're gonna turn at the top. True top left corner is going to be closing the frontier. Well, closing the American frontier. Down at the bottom, issues with Native Americans. And then we're going to turn it same way one more time. And this portion is going to be urbanization. Okay. All right. So the one thing that I want to start with is reminding you that the Gilded Age was different depending on what region of the country you were living in. Okay. For instance, if you were in this portion right here, this is the industrial northeast. Okay? So industry, machines, factories, all of those things, and a lot of cities. If you're in this region, this is the agricultural Midwest. Okay. If you're in this region, it is the agricultural Jim Crow South. Okay. And then over here, obviously this is the West. But there are 3 main things that we have in the West. We have mining. We have farming and ranching. Okay, so obviously farming, you grow the things. Ranching, you raise animals. Okay, so cattle, sheep, that type thing. All right. One of the things that's going to happen is that there is going to be, all along here, a transcontinental railroad. Okay? All right. So we're going to come back to this. So we're going to turn our paper this way. And here we're going to start with the industrial north. Okay? So hopefully it will, the camera will be good to us. All right. So when we're talking about the industrial north, what are we talking about? So just for the sake of time, I'm going to kind of write something and then I'll press play again, just so that you can still hear when I'm talking about things. So when we're talking about the industrial north, we are talking about industry, okay? The center of how the Northeast was making its money was free enterprise and the laissez-faire policies, okay? So that free enterprise and laissez-faire policies plus an abundance of natural resources, that's going to lead to the growth of business. That's why the Northeast became what it was. It had plenty of natural resources, and it had a whole lot of entrepreneurs. So people who wanted to start their own companies, people who wanted to start their own businesses, they are going to be the center of what is being created. So free enterprise and laissez-faire policies plus abundant natural resources led to the growth of business. Okay? Now, if you remember, these were our captains of industry. Now, usually you only called them the captains of industry if you supported them, because the other half called them the robber barons. So a baron is like a regal title back in the old country, okay? So a baron was over a large section of land, okay? It was just an aristocratic title. The captains of industry, the robber barons, they were the owners of business in the industrial Northeast. Who were they? This was Andrew Carnegie, Carnegie Steel, and he was known for philanthropy. Philanthropy is a big fancy word for charity. We had Rockefeller, John D. Rockefeller, Standard Oil. We had Vanderbilt, the railroad. Now, were there other captains of industry? Yes, there was like J.P. Morgan for Morgan Chase Bank. He was all about finance and business, okay? So these are the main ones that have been tested on STAAR, okay? Now, there's going to be a line pointing down here to why they were robber barons. They were accused of workplace abuses to make money. Their bottom line was everything that they're going to do is going to be done to make more money. And they were known for making abuses of their workers to make said money. They paid very low wages. There were long hours, dangerous environments, and until the law was passed, they used child labor. Why? Because they could hire women and children and pay them a fraction of what they would have to pay a man. Okay? The last thing down here is going to be social Darwinism. Okay? When we say social Darwinism, this is the belief. Obviously, Darwinism is a scientific thing. We're going to apply that idea of survival of the fittest to the businesses. If you have a strong business, you're going to survive. If you don't, and if you're not willing to make all of the decisions that they are willing to make, sacrifice human dignity, don't really give your workers any rights or protection, well, as a company, you may not make it. Okay? So all of this is the industrial Northeast. All right? All right, so let's turn the page and we're going to look at closing the American frontier. Okay? So if you need to pause it, you can. How I'm going to kind of divide this is we're going to have causes and then we'll have effects right underneath it. Okay, so the first thing that is going to lead to the closing of the frontier was the discovery of gold in the Klondike. Okay, literally, if you see Klondike, think, oh yeah, that Klondike ice cream bar, frozen, Alaska, gold. Okay, so the discovery of gold in the Klondike means thousands of people are going to move to Alaska to try and get in on that money. Completion of the Transcontinental Railroad is going to lead to there's no more room in the West. And finally, the Homestead Act. So these three things, the Homestead Act, this is the law that gave away land. So it made land available to settle in the West. So because of the discovery of gold in the Klondike, because of completion of the Transcontinental Railroad and the Homestead Act, the population out west increased. Okay, so these are the causes. So what then are the effects? Okay, the effects, number one, and I'll probably zoom in a little bit because it may be harder to see. The first effect, farmers settled the Great Plains. Okay, so in the other map we looked at where the Great Plains are. Farmers settle the Great Plains, and a couple of things are going to happen. We talked a lot about adapting to the environment, meaning you change your ways to adapt. And then we talked about modifying the environment, changing the environment to fit your needs. So these farmers that are going to move to the Great Plains, they adapted to the environment by building sod houses. So they're literally houses made of dirt, mud, and you wait for it to dry. And they used steel plows, okay? But then they modified the environment using barbed wire. Why did they need barbed wire? Because before barbed wire was invented, it was an open range. And what that meant is that if cowboys, ranchers needed to move their cattle, they just moved them. It didn't matter to them, like, if someone owned the land or not. They just moved their cattle where they needed to. But obviously that's going to be a problem for farmers because cattle are going to be walking through their crops. So by using barbed wire, it's going to protect their crops. Okay, so that's the first big effect of people moving west. The next one actually deals specifically with cattle ranching. Cattle ranch industry booms with refrigerated railroad cars and opening markets. So obviously, if it's going to be way more cost efficient to ship meat in a way that's not going to spoil than literally having to herd the cows all the way and then ship the entire cow in the railroad. So refrigerated railroad cars and opening markets, having more places to sell them, is going to be a huge thing. The last thing, and technically like this goes with the last part, the next part that we're going to talk about, but Native Americans were removed to reservations and the buffalo population was decimated. And this is going to be a cause and effect thing. Once the buffalo are gone, the Native Americans who resisted moving to the reservations, they didn't have a choice because they relied on the buffalo literally to live. So when the buffalo are gone, they don't have a choice. They're gonna have to move. Okay? So when we're talking about the Native Americans, I kind of want you to write on your paper, like up here is going to be Native Americans, and here are Native Americans, okay? So you have that transcontinental railroad that's going here. They're going to do two things, okay? The transcontinental railroad led to rapid settlement, meaning people can move there quickly. And the towns that are going to be established along the railroad stops, the towns gave access to essential goods. So all of these things are going to come from the Transcontinental Railroad. All right, so talking about the Native Americans, let's look at some of the issues that came about with the Native Americans. So Indian wars, obviously, there are going to be clashes as tribes did not want to live on a reservation. They didn't want a reservation life. They were hunters and gatherers still, or they wanted to be. They wanted to be free and live wherever, how they've always lived. And that is going to have to change. So as they were being forced onto reservation, that's when all of the fighting was happening. A huge part is going to be the Dawes Act, okay? The Dawes Act was a law to assimilate. Remember, assimilate means basically to Americanize them. They wanted to change the native culture. So, law to assimilate or Americanize Native Americans, which means to change their lifestyle, clothing, and appearance. And they wanted to encourage farming. Okay? This act is usually pretty heavily tested on STAAR, like at least one question about it. So the Dawes Act, law to assimilate and Americanize Native Americans, meaning change lifestyle, clothing, and appearance. And the Dawes Act encouraged farming. Okay? All right. The last thing is when we talk about this assimilation, one of the things, oh, I love how I put 2 2s. This would be a 3, Miss Holloway. All right, so Indian boarding schools like the Carlisle School forced Native children to change their culture and become more American. So this is going to be forced assimilation. A lot of times they'll put a picture of either a group of Native American children, or they'll put one Native American in their traditional dress, and then one side right beside it that has the Americanized version of that child. Okay? But it's all about forced assimilation for the Native American kids. All right. So the last thing, we're going to turn the page one more time, is going to be urbanization. So what is urbanization? It is when people moved from the rural country to the urban city, usually for industrial jobs. Okay, so urban is city. So urbanization is the process of people moving to the city, making these big cities. So what was urbanization going to lead to? It caused overcrowding, sanitation problems, and stress on infrastructure. So infrastructure is like, what do we do with all the poop from all the horses that are going to be moving to this city? Are there gutters? Like, where does sewage go? Who collects the garbage in a city? How do people get electricity eventually? How do people get water? All of this is infrastructure. And if there's not enough of it, when you add that many people, it's going to cause problems. So the cause is urbanization is going to lead to overcrowding. People are living in tenements. It is not safe. It is not sanitary. sanitation problems, and stress on infrastructure. So, where did people live? Just said it. They lived in tenements. So these are the apartments that are completely run down. They have poor sanitation and overcrowding. Okay? If you want the shock of a life, you can pretty much just Google life in tenements and you'll get some pretty raw pictures of what it was like to live in these tenement buildings. Okay? And then we're going to add kind of another category right down here, and that is immigration. Okay? The weird thing about the United States, and it's really kind of funny, I mean, if it wasn't so horrible, it would be funny, but it's pretty bad. Pretty much every group of immigrants that come here to the United States, the new group gets all the crap. Okay? Oh, those old immigrants were great, but man, these new ones, how are we going to live with this? And then, 10, 15 years later, a new group of immigrants are going to come in from a different place. And now the old ones, oh, those old immigrants were great. The new ones, guys, it's the United States. Every 10, 15 years, we have a different group of immigrants coming to the United States. It's literally what our country was made on. Like, that's it. Okay? So when we talk about old immigrants and new immigrants, it's talking about the different groups. Did they come from old Ireland and England and Germany and Scandinavia? Did they mostly speak English? This new group, they're going to come from Southern Europe, Eastern Europe. They don't speak English. They're not educated. So just depending on where they're from. New immigrants, if you see this term, it's talking about the group that came for jobs and economic opportunity. At home, they faced political and religious persecution, so they came for freedom. This group of new immigrants, they came from Southern and Eastern Europe, but they faced a lot of challenges, okay? They didn't speak English, they had a different religion, and they faced a lot of challenges because when they got here, they were not welcomed because of nativism, okay? So nativism is an anti-immigrant group that wanted to restrict immigration. Okay? All right. So those are nativists. And the biggest win for the nativists was the Chinese Exclusion Act. It was passed because of a fear of losing jobs to Chinese immigrants in California. So we want to restrict those jobs to white people, white immigrants, white Americans. So they're literally going to say, if you are Chinese, you cannot come in. Okay? So this is a pretty good representation of the Gilded Age. I know it's a lot, but again, depending on where you were in the country, the Gilded Age looked very differently. So then from here, where do we go? Well, remember, the next time period is the Progressive Era. The Progressive Era's goal was to fix the problems that we talked about in the Gilded Age. So hopefully this helped, and you will do great on the Gilded Age on your STAAR test.